Hello and welcome to the course on Introduction on Psychology of Language. I am Dr. Ark Verma. I am an assistant professor of psychology and cognitive science in the Department of Humanity and Social Sciences and the interdisciplinary program in cognitive science at IIT Kanpur. This is a course called Introduction to Psychology of Language, wherein we are going to talk about various issues that are faced when you are talking about how people understand language, how people use language, also how people acquire language. We will talk about various aspects of how language is understood from the point of view of a psychologist. We are going to talk about the fact that how are human languages different from other communication systems like those of the animals. What is it that makes human language special? What is it that makes this unique to our species? Also, we know that language is is probably the most important cognitive function that we have, using which we can communicate and talk to everybody around us. Man is a social animal, and language is that makes this possible. Language is what makes communication possible. Language is what makes cooperation and some very interesting cognitive functions, cognitive interactions possible with our species. So, in this course I will talk to you about various aspects of language. The course is 8 weeks long, as I have already told in the introduction video. This is the first week of the course. In the first week of this course, we will talk mostly about introduction to language. The title of this week is Introduction to Language. We will cover 5 different aspects of knowing what language is about in this week in the 5 lectures that are yet to begin. In today's lecture, I will focus more on the question of what is language. We might define language in a variety of ways. We might ask different questions to us and to the to linguists, to other psychologists, and what does it make what does it make this particular communication system that we use and abuse probably to be called as language? What is the definition of language? What is one thing about language that makes it apart from other communication systems? So, let us ask some of the basic questions that we are going to address this week. Well, the first question is, what does it mean to know a language? We know that animals around us and other species like insects and so many other fishes and other mammals that we know of do have some sort of a rudimentary communication system. Some of them do have a very sophisticated communication system. For example, if you look at vervet monkeys make very specific calls of danger when they see, say for example, a predator on the ground versus a predator on air. So, what is it that makes this cognitive function special? What are the basic characteristics of this cognitive function? The second question that we are going to ask is in this week is what are the basic concepts in the study of language? Suppose you want to study and understand aspects of language as a student. What are the kind of questions that you are going to ask? Also, we might kind of distinguish between what is it about language that, say for example, linguists are interested in, or for example psycholinguists are interested in. Are they asking the same questions, or are their questions slightly different? We are going to ask all of these questions in the coming lectures. The third thing is we will survey a brief range of animal communication systems. We will see to what degree they are sophisticated and to what degree of richness and complexity they have, and we will try and compare them back to the human communication system and see if there are any differences worth caring for. We will also talk about how did languages come in their current form. What is the story of the evolution of language? Where is the point in history that you can look back and say that this is where language probably started? So, we are going to talk about all of that in some detail as well. There are multiple theories of language evolution. There are multiple perspectives on language evolution which come across from various scientists who are working across these different disciplines. So, we will talk about those questions also in one of these lectures. The final lecture of the week will actually be about the distinction or the relationship between language and thought. It is almost a chicken and egg problem. What comes first, your thought about saying something, or you are already made that sentence and then you are thinking about it? This question can be asked in a variety of ways. It's almost, that's why I said it's a chicken and an egg problem, and people have wondered about this as much. So, we will talk about some of these evidences, some of the perspectives from psycholinguistics that kind of illuminates this relationship between language and thought. So these are the 5 lectures we're going to have in this week. Let us move ahead. The questions that I was talking to you about, or say for example the way these questions have been portrayed, are basically the questions that are asked by this particular specific field of researchers referred to as psycholinguists. Psycholinguists are typically psychologists who are interested in understanding aspects about language. Psychologists who are interested in understanding the neural and the neural processes and the behaviors related to the acquisition, use and comprehension of language are referred to as psycholinguists. This study and this entire course basically is also can also be referred as a course on introduction to psycholinguistics. So let us move ahead. Let us start by defining language. Now if you look at language, it is a very simple system. It's a very simple system of symbols and rules. So one of the ways of looking at language and trying to define language is to define it as a system of symbols and rules that enables us to communicate with each other. So the system symbols and rules enables us to express whatever we are feeling at any point in time and to get that message across to any listener or groups of listeners nearby. We can also say for example write something and we can shout something, and we can say for example using these various modes of communication, the idea is to get the message across. Now you said symbols and rules. What are these symbols? When you talk about symbols in particular language, it begins with the sounds. So the symbols that we are mostly concerned with are the sounds of the language. They are referred to as phonemes. We'll talk about them in one of the later lectures, but the sounds are combined in some sense using a particular kind of a rule based method, let us say, to form words. So you have all of these symbols, you have these basic sounds are combined into words, and then these words are combined into phrases and then sentences, and those sentences into larger paragraphs and speeches and texts. That is what the symbols of the language are. Now any of these symbols cannot be combined in a particular systematic manner in which they can be comprehensible by others unless there is a particular pattern to combining them, unless there is a set of rules that you use to combine these symbols together, to put these symbols together to form higher level messages. So the other important aspect of language is these rules. These rules are referred to variously as syntax or grammar, and we will talk about syntax and grammar in much more detail in the coming lectures. So I'll just tell you this, that grammar or syntax is the rules by which we play this game. There are so many symbols, and there are ways which are specified let us say in the grammar of each language that you can use to combine these symbols into phrases and sentences, and using these fixed set of rules and these fixed set of symbols, you can have the entire language that you can think about. I'll give an example. Let us say for example English has around 26 alphabets, or let us say if you talk about sounds, English has around 40 phonemes, 40 basic sounds. So let us say 40 phonemes. You can use these you can combine these 40 phonemes to form so many number of words. You can combine those so many number of words using the rules of syntax or using the rules of grammar to basically get the entire English language. So you have a fixed set of symbols, you have a fixed set of rules, and this can combine to lead you to an infinite amount of language. That is what is the interesting part of what language is. And the last thing that we have to also cover in this definition of language is this aspect of communication. What is communication? What do you want to communicate? It begins with very basic things. Say for example, if you want to communicate your needs, I am feeling hungry, I am feeling thirsty, I want to rest, messages, simple messages like these. However, we also know that say for example, people communicate their intentions using language as well. I want to go to Africa, I want to eat a pizza, I want to do this, I want to do that, or I am going to do this. All of these are your wants and intentions that are also easily communicated using language. We also say for example talk about our emotions. I'm feeling sad today, I'm feeling happy today, and sometimes we are talking about say for example almost in a completely unprovoked manner. We can say for example on a random day pick up a stranger and just go to them and say, what a nice weather it is today. what a nice sight that is. Or let us say, for example, if you're watching a cricket match or something, what a nice player this guy is, even if the two of you had been sitting silent for hours together. So language or communication that happens through language is not only very basic, it's not only the communication of what you need at that point in time or what you want at that point in time, it is also very creative. We know that we use, say for example, language to write fictional accounts of things that have not happened. We use all our imagination, and we use all our imagination to create very, very interesting, very, very beautiful specimens of language. Say for example, people write fantastical stories, people write poetry, people write say for example interesting articles, opinion pieces, so on and so forth. Part of the aim of this course and part of what we will try and do in the coming 8 weeks is to understand how is that happening. How are people taking this very small set of 40 sounds and, say for example, this very small set of rules and combining them in such a manner that they create almost an infinite amount of language, also language that is understood to everyone who's learned to read or who's learned to understand that language. So let us move ahead. Let us kind of try and understand what are the other interesting features of language. If you were to describe language, and that effort has also been put a variety of times, one of the first names that comes to mind is that of Charles Hockett. Charles Hockett back in 1960 came up with these so many design features, these 16, 17 design features, wherein he's used these features to describe what communication systems look like. What are the features, what are the basic necessities in a particular communication system? I am going to discuss a subset of those design features that Hockett has specified, specifically those which apply completely to human language, also slightly uniquely to human language. Let us start with the first of them. The first feature of language that is of utmost importance is the feature of semanticity. Language is used always to communicate meaning. Any aspect, any entity which is member of your language in some sense or the other has to have a meaning or a function. So semanticity is the idea that language is there to communicate meaning. The specific signals, or let us say symbols as we are talking about, in the language will need to convey meaning of some kind or the other. Suppose, say for example, there is this word called apple, or this word called mango, or this word called cricket, or this word called going and sleeping and moving around. Each of these words depict one particular kind of meaning. Say for example, apple, banana and mango they denote a particular object, that particular fruit. Going, sleeping, playing are words that indicate those particular actions, those particular things. And similarly, say for example, there are abstract nouns like anger, happiness, sadness. These are words that denote particular abstract feelings. So any aspect in language basically is meant to communicate particular kind of meaning. So that is one of the most important aspect of language, and this is referred to as the property of semanticity. The other property that we can talk about is this property of arbitrariness. Now you saw that there are these different words which denote or symbolize or refer to these different things in the world. Say for example, again apple refers to a fruit, mango refers to another fruit, cricket refers to a game, so on and so forth. Now is there a relationship between this word and the actual object or idea or event or action that this word is referring? Are these two related in any sense? The answer is no. This property of arbitrariness tells us that there is no necessary relationship between these words and the actual objects or events that they are referring to. Okay, so for example, you can have a word like ship, and ship denotes a very large object, which is by the way a very small word, and you can have a very long word, say for example like platypus or crocodile, which basically refer to very small objects if you compare them with a ship. So say for example, if somebody were to look for a relationship between, say for example, language that long words should denote longer objects or small words should denote smaller objects, that's not really the case. These relationships are completely arbitrary and are there solely because of a sort of a consensus, a sort of an agreement that exists between the users of this language, such that this particular sound will be used to refer to this particular object or action or event. Suppose, say for example, tomorrow some of your friends get together and say that we are not going to call this particular red fruit as apple, we are going to call it, say for example, papple or something like that. If there is enough consensus and you start using papple again and again, you might basically eventually be using this same word to refer to this fruit, and that relation becomes permanent. So that is how this concept of mapping between these words and the objects really works. Now another interesting point aspect of language is this aspect of discreteness. As I said, say for example, English has 40 phonemes and it has 26 alphabets, and say for example that is true for most or almost every language that we know of, that it has a fixed number of symbols. Now there will be obviously a problem can come up, say for example, if you are not being able to discretely differentiate between these different symbols. If you have to use them, if you have to combine them in so many ways, you have to know that you have to at least be able to tell each symbol apart from each other. That is the property of discreteness. All of these components of language are organized into a set of distinct categories, and these distinct categories have clear-cut boundaries using which you can differentiate between each of these components. Say for example, if you were not able to distinguish between pat and bat, or say for example the boundaries of pa and ba, you will not be able to distinguish between the words pat and bat, and that will obviously be a problem. So discreteness is this property of language which tells us that each of these component sounds of the language should be clearly distinguishable from each other, and there are various ways we do it. So we will talk about it as well. Another property of language, something that you say for example we almost take for granted, is this property of being able to communicate about things that are not right there, that are not exactly right in front of you. Suppose for example I have this pen in front of me and I can talk about this pen as much as I want to, but I can also talk about, say for example, an umbrella which is not there right in front of me. I can talk about today and what I am doing right away, but I can also talk about what I was doing yesterday and what are my plans for tomorrow. I can talk about this place and I can talk about that place where you are sitting and watching this lecture. So this is something which is very interesting and very unique about our language, is that it allows us to talk about not only things present in this time, it allows us to talk about things present yesterday, that is in the past, and tomorrow, that is in the future. This property is referred to as the property of temporal displacement, which allows us to talk about things that are not in the present time. Also, as I said, I can talk about things here and things there, which is typically the property which is typically referred to as the property of spatial displacement. I can talk about using my language of things that are not exactly present in this spatial area that I am currently there. I can talk about something that is there or something that is, say for example, in Delhi or in Moscow or in any other place in the world. So this is also a very important property that is referred to as displacement. It has two varieties: spatial displacement and temporal displacement. Different languages achieve this concept of talking about things displaced in time or things displaced in place using different varieties. Say for example, English has auxiliary verbs such as, say for example, I will do it to talk about future, I was doing it talk about the past, they were playing, say talk about a group of people that were playing at some point in time. Whereas for example Mandarin, which is the language that is spoken in China mostly, uses typically different means. Say for example, they will have adverbial expressions such as, say for example, if you have to talk about yesterday the man goes, basically English would just say the man went. Okay, so you have to kind of specify everything in Chinese, so it's not really using the auxiliary verbs in the same fashion as in English. So this is also something that this very interesting property of displacement is manifested in different ways across different languages of the world. Another important property of human language is this property of duality of patterning. Now duality of patterning typically refers to the fact that at any point in our language we can simultaneously perceive language or we can simultaneously produce language at multiple levels. you can be talking about, say for example, language being produced in terms of sounds. You're just somebody might just focus at what the sounds are coming out from my mouth, especially if you don't know the language that I'm speaking in. So for this listener who does not know this language, I'm just making random sounds, pa, ba, ta, ka, all of these kind of things. Somebody who understands my language can actually make that connection and say that this guy is speaking in words. He's saying, this, that, here, there, etc. So at the same time, you see that the signal is present at least two levels. I'm producing the signal at two levels, and somebody who is attending to the signal at two levels. Obviously, if you know the language, you don't really need to focus on the sounds. But suppose if I ask you that, if I give you a sentence that Ram went to play, or say for example the cat chased the mouse, and I say that please replace the first sound of the second word, you can say for example the bat chased the mouse. So in case you want to and there is a need to attend to this second level of signal, you can obviously do so. Okay, so this is this property of language which is referred to as duality of patterning. The signal is present at multiple levels and is available for analysis at multiple levels by the listener. Another very interesting property of language is this property of generativity. I was giving you again and again this example of a fixed number of symbols and a fixed number of rules and this infinite amount of language that comes about. How is this possible? This is possible through this property of generativity. Generativity is the property that kind of specifies that using a fixed number of symbols, we can create a potentially infinite amount of language. This is the property, say for example, which is specified in various ways, but it is a unique property of all the languages, say for example, of all the human languages that are known to man. Obviously, there is one or two exceptions. We will discuss those exceptions in a bit. Now, how is this really happening? How is generativity actually manifested? So, we will have to say for example, to understand generativity in some detail, also attend to this feature of language called grammar. I have talked about grammar in the beginning. Grammar is what? Grammar tells us how to combine the symbols to create appropriate messages, to create appropriate signals and be able to transmit them or communicate them to the listeners. Language scientists, psycholinguists and linguists basically. So linguists are basically people who are concerned about the structure of language. They are concerned about language per se, not really concerned about the user of the language so much. A psycholinguist or say for example a psychologist like myself is more concerned with how the user of the language is acquiring and later using this language. A linguist is more concerned with the nature of the language that is being acquired and what are the changes in the language that are coming in. So this is one very interesting distinction that you have to keep in mind. However, we are coming back to the point, we are talking about linguists. Linguists have basically distinguished between two sorts of grammars. They have distinguished between prescriptive grammars. Now prescriptive grammars are typically grammars that specify the rules of how the language is going to be used. How are you going to combine the words to form perfectly acceptable, grammatically correct sentences. There is a lot of fixation when you are young and you are learning in school to create grammatically correct sentences. Say for example, if you are in class 8, 9, 10th and that there is this English language class, the teacher expects you to create perfectly grammatical sentences. We are always trying to look for those things. So a particular grammar that prescribes how language should be structured, how words should be combined to create valid sequences of sentences, etc., is prescriptive grammar. A more interesting variety of grammar, however, is referred to as descriptive grammar. The descriptive grammar is something that kind of derives backwards. It looks at how people are using language and then it kind of derives its rules from how people have been using language. So it does not set out the rules first and then the use of language happens. It kind of does it the other way around. It looks at how people are using language and then derives its rules from them. So this is a small distinction between descriptive grammar and prescriptive grammar. Different people think differently about how important grammar is and what role does grammar play. But one of the very important persons to talk about grammar ever was Andrei Jakendorf, has been talking about the importance of grammar and what role does grammar play in our understanding of language. So some of the things that he says are very interesting. He says that grammars determine the order that symbols appear in expressions. So that is one of the first ways that grammar kind of regulates our use of language. It will tell us the order in which the symbols are going to be presented. Say for example, adjectives are usually supposed to come before the nouns. You are not going to talk about car green, you are going to always talk about a green car or a red apple or a yellow banana. So you will see always these adjectives are coming before the noun, so that you know what is it is being talked about. Okay, so for example, I am talking about a car that is green. Okay, the other thing is also that, say for example, grammar dictates the rules about, say for example, gender agreement and number agreement. How many people are you talking about? If you have to say a sentence like this girl likes this play, or say for example, if you are talking about many girls, you will probably say these girls like this this play. So depending upon the number of girls that are in question, the verb kind of changes form. So you say like or likes, depending upon is it a girl or is it many girls. So this is also one of the ways that grammar kind of regulates our production of language. The other important thing that language also does is it does case marking. It kind of tells us that how particular words should appear in a way that they fulfill the particular grammatical functions that is expected of them. Say for example, he left the class and not him left the class. So you have to change the pronoun in such a way that it kind of fulfills the grammatical function it is supposed to in this particular sentence. So this is also something that Jakendorf has said, and we'll come back to Jakendorf in one of the later lectures. Now we've talked about this important aspect of generativity, and we've talked about what grammar kind of does to manifest generativity. The other way to look at generativity is this property which is referred to as recursion. The concept of recursion is defined as the ability to place one component inside another component of the same type. In other words, it is the concept of embedding. How do you embed particular kinds of components in the same kind of components again and again? Let us take an example. Let us say the example is this sentence, Tom likes beans, and then you have another sentence, Susan thinks, and then at the end of it is X. Now Susan thinks X, Susan thinks, you can put Tom like beans, so Susan thinks Tom likes beans. This is an example of how you can put a sentence in another sentence. Recursion can go essentially in almost an infinite loop. Suppose, say for example, I were to make this example that John knows, Dave believes, Jenny hopes, Carol recognizes, Bob realizes, Susan thinks, Tom likes beans. So what I am doing is I am just borrowing this example from Matthew Traxler's book, Introduction to Psycholinguistics. What I am doing is I am just embedding one sentence in another sentence in another sentence in another sentence. This is what is recursion. You can kind of combine all of these components, one in the other, and move on. Now recursion is one of the things that linguists and psycholinguists have said that gives this language the property of discrete infinity. This discrete infinity is typically the ability to generate infinite messages from finite set of symbols and rules. So this is one of the most important properties of language. Now as I was saying, while most documented languages we know something about and they have been documented and scientists have described them, demonstrate this property of recursion. However, with one exception. Piraha, the language of the Piraha tribe in the Brazilian Amazon forests, does not really have this property of recursion. Now recursion is such a basic property of language that it is considered by most language scientists or linguists, say for example most notably Noam Chomsky and others, as to be the basic, most unique, the most necessary property of human languages. In case there is a language that does not show this property, it kind of might have interesting consequences for our understanding of what languages are, but we will come to that in a bit. Suppose, say for example, there is this sentence, hand me the nails that Dan bought. In Piraha, which does not have recursion, you will have to say the sentence in this way, give me the nails, Dan bought those nails, they are the same. Okay, so this is the way you kind of this is how you'll have to speak about if your language does not allow recursion to happen. Okay, say for example, let's take another example. Dan and Ted went to Brazil. If you were to say this in Piraha, you'll probably be saying something equivalent to Dan went to Brazil, Ted went to Brazil. Some kind of combination is not being permitted in this language. So if recursion does not occur in Piraha, then you can wonder, is it a necessary feature of language? With this question, I'll move to a different kind of a thing. Why does Piraha does not have recursion? So Daniel Everett, who's worked with the Piraha tribe for over 30 years and has written an amazing book called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, you might find it and read it. But Everett kind of wonders about why is recursion not there? Why is recursion not found in the language of the Piraha people? He says that recursion introduces statements which are assertive, and Piraha people's traditions and their cultures and the way they are, they do not make direct assertions about the state of the world. And because they do not make direct assertions about the state of the world, that is one of the reasons why recursion is so difficult to find in their language. Everett explains the Piraha people as a very literal minded people, having no creation myths. They do not tell fictional stories, they do not believe in assertions made by others unless they have experienced those things that they are talking about firsthand. So this is interesting that because their culture and because their thought processes, because their traditions are in such a way, that is typically being reflected in their language as well. Everett argues that these cultural principles are the ones that are determining the form of the Piraha grammar. Nested statements like relative causes require some sorts of presuppositions. You already assume that, okay, this is what has happened, and therefore because the Piraha people are not being able to accept those suppositions, they are not being able to have recursion in their language. So this is again some of the things that Everett has talked about on why Piraha might not have recursion in the first place. This makes a case, however, for the Piraha grammar to be sourced out of their culture. So Piraha grammar per se is probably shaped by the Piraha culture. With this statement, I leave you with the two take-home messages for this lecture. We've talked a little bit about definition of language. What is language? System of symbols and rules which helps us communicate three things. Also, we've talked a little bit about various characteristics of language. We've talked about some of the design features that Hockett talked about. We also talked a little bit in detail about what is recursion and how is it unique to what language is. However, we've also noted that at least one of the known languages called Piraha does not show recursion, and it's almost an interesting debate that is going on about whether to accept Piraha as an exception or we can come back and change the definition of how we understand language. I'll stop here. We'll meet in the next lecture. Thank you.